Thank you very much for waiting. And we will begin the special session, which is a special dialogue on net zero. First of all, I'd like to introduce two moderators for this session. First of all, Mr. Tanaka Nobuo, the chair of ICEF Steering Committee, former executive director, International Energy Agency, and CEO of Tanaka Global Incorporated. And Dr. Smil Selagelden, ICEF Steering Committee, co-chair of the board of Nizami Ganjavi International Center, Emeritus Librarian of Alexandria, former VP of the World Bank. And now I would like to ask Mr. Tanaka to moderate the session. So Mr. Tanaka, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. I welcome all the audience to this session. This session will be the most interesting one. Of course, in the morning, the Johan Rockström session was fun, and the last session on energy transition is also very interesting. But this one will be most successful, or either could be disastrous. I don't know which way this goes, but this session, we will have Vaclav Smil. He is one of our steering committee member, and he's a professor emeritus of the University of Manitoba. He is kind of skeptics about the net zero by 2050. And he will always urge us to get the reality of transformation, how difficult it is. So he will talk about that. And then we will have Jarand Rystad. He is on the web, and he's participating from Malaysia, I think. And he has a very successful think tank about energy statistics, and IEA even also ask their information. So the Rystad Energy is making a very interesting analysis about the future of the energy sustainability, and he will rebuttal Vaclav Smil. So how things goes is very interesting. So Hoesung is, of course, he is another steering committee member, but he's a former chair of IPCC. So he definitely has a very strong word about feasibility of net zero by 2050. So we will listen to him. And Sakano-san, Akira Sakano, she is representative director of Zero Waste Japan, and she made a very successful career as an activist in the efficiency and waste management. So she will comment as on this discussion, and I'm really curious what she's going to say. She's also one of our young professional in ICEF. So the younger generation's view could be very important to discuss about net zero by 2050. So let's start with Vaclav. The floor is yours. Make a good, strong case about the difficulty. Take the microphone, Vaclav, and also use that.
Well, I had this presentation. They asked me.
Yeah, well, presentation is coming.
Here it is, right. We don't really need it. You could reduce it to one sentence. Not going to happen, really, right? Zero carbon in 2050. Or we could write a book. I wrote a small book about it this year, and you can download it on my website called Halfway Between Kyoto and 2050. I think the main thing why it's not going to happen is not what people think. It's not, that we don't have the technical how to do it. We have many technical solutions, nor is it the monies. As you very well know, monies is no problem. You just add zero in computer. You don't have to even print the monies today, right? So remember that in last month, we had a new startup in US, which started up with $1.5 billion, right? So clearly, money is not a problem. I mean, money is a problem at trillion level, but not at billion level. But not the main problem. The main problem is scale. So my brief presentation will just introduce you to these matters of scale. Let's begin with what we are dealing with. In 2023, we set new emission record. For the first time, CO2 emissions from energy sector alone, that is, ripping up the stuff from the ground, processing natural gas and so on, surpassed 40 billion tons. That's 40 to 10 to 9. We are now well advanced into 2024, so we know for sure already that we will set another record. Not by very much, but again above 40 billion tons. Right? We also know pretty well what will happen next year, and we know that we will set up another record in 2025. Now, of course, as with any complex system, this is going to stop, right? I mean, it's going to saturate, and then eventually it will start going down. But at least for next 2, maybe 3 years, we'll keep setting new records. As a result of setting these new records, this is how it goes. There have been few years when we had a little dip, right? Last time was a COVID dip, so there are these little dips. Nevertheless, these little dips in emissions do nothing at all. This is the closer image of these increases in Egypt. They do nothing alone to the levels of the CO2 in the atmosphere because of the interaction between the hydrosphere, biosphere, and atmosphere. The fact that you drop your emissions 1 year by 500 million tons doesn't make any difference, right? CO2 keeps going on. We've been measuring since 1958 at Mauna Loa, and at that time it was 318 parts per million, and now, of course, it's nearly 440 ppm. And this is the story of Mauna Loa, right? It's monotonously up. There has not been a single year since 1958 when CO2 concentration in the atmosphere would even dip by a little bit. It goes up and up and up, which means, and we know it for sure, that even somehow, if we would stop all emissions tomorrow, there'll be still quite a few years because of the interaction between the 3 big systems. It will go up and up and up. So this is what's kind of, in the pipe already is going up. Now, this is what we are told, we are somewhere at the peak there, and we are told that by 2050 we'll go to 0. We'll have to do something which no complex system has ever done in human history. That is to go slow, then go faster, then saturate, and then go like that, right? That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen even with pandemics. Even pandemics don't slaughter all people, you have noticed. There are quite a few of us here around past COVID, right? So this is how the complex system don't behave. Once they reach the plateau, suppose we reach the emissions plateau in 2027, 2028, right? Then we may stay on that plateau for quite a few years, or likely we will go down bit by bit, bit by bit. Why we go down very slowly is the rest of my talk, to show you what will happen. What underlies this civilization, contrary to what people might think, is not cell phones and AI and integrated circuits or whatever. It's the mass of materials. It's the stuff. Stoff, as Germans say that. That's what it is. That's what runs the civilization. And we need stuff in huge amounts. And this is why 0 carbon by 2050 is unlikely. Because, let's say you admire Chinese economic development over past 30 years, right? Let me tell you that China, during that period, during 3 years, every 3-year period, it used more cement than the United States used in the total 20th century together, okay? That tells you the amount of stuff needed, right? We produce now more than 4 billion tons of cement, 4 to 10 to 9 cement, right? More than half of it is made in China, right? And it's going up and up. If you think that, suppose India will do only half of China in terms of economic development, there is another billions and billions of tons of cement needed, right? Now, you look at let's see, go away. Okay. The other one is steel. Most of the people don't recognize what it is, but this is an old-fashioned blast furnace. The original type of this was invented somewhere around 1350, somewhere in between France and Germany, in Alsace, or wherever. It hasn't changed much. It's, instead of stone, it's now made of steel, and this is how we make steel. First, we make iron in blast furnace, and then we take a little bit of carbon out of it in electric arc furnaces and make steel. 2 billion tons of it. We need 2 billion tons of it every year. So suppose you come in and you say, oh, we'll make a green steel. Instead of reducing oxides of iron, Fe2O3 or whatever, with carbon, that is with coke, we will reduce it with hydrogen. Fine, we know how to do it. There's no problem to it. Fe2O3 plus HO2, you get your iron and you get water. Very nice, right? But it's 2 billion tons, which means you have to have an equivalent amount of hydrogen, couple 100 million tons of it. How much green hydrogen we make today? Next to zero, right? What is the road from 0 to 200 million tons of something? Even if you have money, we know how to do it. But again, it's a scale which defeats you, right? Now, moreover, it's even if you would have this green hydrogen ramping up in the future. Look what's happening now, right? In 2024, the capacity was about 1.2 billion tons, right? But the announcement is that that under construction, we have many of these furnaces in China, in India, in other parts of the world, right? And they all will be fueled by coke. There will be traditional furnaces. Now, there is a great mystery about the blast furnace. Those of you who have never seen it, it's one of the most magical constructs of the human mind. You build that stuff, you load it with that iron ore and limestone and coke, and then you fire it up. You lit the fire. And that furnace will be lit on that fire for the next 15 years. It will not die for the next 15 years. So if I build my coke furnace today, for the next 15 years, it'll be working. So typically, these furnaces work something like, 15 to 20 years. So if I'm building new capacities here, they will stay here. Furnace built in 2030 will be here easily until 2050, right? So that's in the pipeline, right? This is a typical petrochemical setup to make plastics, right? All these plastics are made from petrochemical feedstocks, from natural gas or crude oil, right? Right now, we need about 350 million tons of it every year, but by 2050, we will need 50% more. Plastics are the fastest increasing material consumption in the world today, because everything you look at, it's all plastic, right? This is all plastic. Everything you look at is plastic. So there is a little bit of glass, but we are replacing it. I have a very bad news for you. In the US, all the walls used to be done from drywall. Drywall is a beautiful material. It's CaSO4. Calcium sulfate, plaster of Paris, right? It's a natural material, decays easily. You put a little bit of cardboard on top of it, it's fine. Now they are replacing that cardboard by what? That drywall. They are replacing by PVC panels, beautiful, smooth, right? If you replace all drywall in US construction by PVC panels, you need another 200 million tons of that stuff in no time, right? So this is already in the pipeline. Our dependence on these things is rising. Now, everything what you have on your body, okay? Your shoes, your clothes, your ties, whatever, was on one of these ships and one of these containers. The biggest of these ships now carry more than 24,000 of these containers, right? How they run these ships? They don't run on solar or wind. They run the world's largest engines invented by Rudolf Diesel in the 1890s, right? 50, 60, 70 megawatt giant diesels. Now, recently, we are putting in record numbers of new ships. Once you put them in, they last for 14, 15 years. The last few years have been record additions of these ships. Right? See, the container fleet is rising every year, right? So I could go into other material aspects. I could go into copper, of course, right? I could go into lithium, right? I could go into rare earths, right? I could go even into wood, because there is plenty of wood needed and more will be needed. But the point is this, that even if you have monies to do it, even if you have technical expertise and even have technical solutions to do it, to ramp up, to raise something from 0 or near 0 to 100 million, 500 million, billion tons a year necessarily takes time. And meanwhile, you are installing the old technologies, which will last because of their natural life for the next 15 to 20 years. So we are delaying the time of their replacement. So this is where we are called. So, if I would suggest something along the lines of rational progress, we should concentrate on things which could be done, which are doable, and not simply, to subscribe to what is basically a fairy tale being 0 carbon by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaclav. I remember that when I read your book, I read many of your books, but you said nuclear is successful failure. Why you said that?
I coined that term in one of my books, I think published in 2003, and I still stand by it because nothing has changed since 2003. It's successful because globally it delivers about 10% of electricity, and that's significant. And in some countries it delivers 20, 30, and in France actually it delivers like 70%. So in that sense it's successful. But it's a failure because if you look who is building, then nobody is, right? US. Even when the US was building, it took them more than a decade, even close to 2 decades, to build a single plant, right? The latest 2 plants in Europe under construction, right? One in France, one in England, they have the similar record. They've been under construction for ages. So the only country which has been building successfully is China, and India a little bit, right? So that's why I say successful failure. We've achieved something, but we underachieved what we thought we will eventually achieve. Because in mid-70s, we were convinced if the meeting would be in mid-70s, that by year 2000, basically everything would be nuclear energy. And not only fission reactors, but fast breeder reactors, right? And there is not a single fast breeder around. So that's why successful failure.
Thank you very much. Jarand, I think,
yes.
Thank you for waiting. Now the floor is yours. How you respond to Vaclav?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I think I have some distinct differences in the view of the future, but also some similarities. So I'll try to illustrate that now, and I will start with one of my favorite slides, which is showing 300 years of energy history. Let me now see if I can turn to the right window to go one forward. So here probably you see this. And why this is my favorite is that it's quite counterintuitive for many people, thinking that why should energy peak and decline when we have a global population that will be growing to 10.2 billion people in 2090, and then we have global GDP growing with increased wealth to everybody. And one way to get you to understand this is to relate it to your own car. And some of you have a gasoline car, and you know that you typically use 5 to 6 liters to get 100 kilometers. So divide that to how long you get for 1 kilometer, for 1 liter. That's about 17 kilometers. And 1 liter of gasoline is 10 kilowatt hours, or 36 megajoule per liter, for those that remember this from school. With an electric car, typically you get 50 to 60 kilometers per 10 kilowatt hour. So exactly the same energy amount of primary energy is giving you 3 times the service if you go from fossil fuel or molecules to electricity. So you see that all the end user segments that this slide, industries, transportation, buildings, they are getting more access to energy, to useful energy. But the losses will be much smaller in the future, since we will have an energy system that will go from molecules to electrons. So this is, many people are in what I call the primary energy fallacy. They think that the primary energy will continue to grow and don't look at the end use of energy, which is important to look at. So this is why I highlighted this. But of course, this requires that we are successful in transforming the energy system from fossil fuel, coal, oil and gas, to solar and wind and hydropower and geothermal and some biomass and some nuclear that you see here. So this is, and this looks very fast, but this is a very compressed time scale. Remember, it's 300 years and it's 75 years ahead. But you can ask, is this the first time we are facing this kind of tremendously fast energy transitions and energy transition in total? No, this is actually the 3rd time. So first, in the mid-1800s, we had whale hunting and wood cutting was a key harvesting of energy. But that was then an energy crisis. We had too little energy in the continent, for example, in Europe and many other places. And luckily, coal came and saved us. And coal was taking over in all segments, transportation, heating, metal production, everything. But then in the 1950s and 60s, after a very slow start, finally oil and gas came in and took over most of the energy market in a very short time. And now we are facing the third big transition. And just one illustration of the pace of this, if you look at railroad fuel, that was primarily coal until 1945. So look at the statistics from US. Coal consumption was 120 million tons. And in some articles I found from 1945, it was a big worry. It is not enough coal to feed the railroad sector after the World War II, after the growth that was expected. But instead of growing, it declined with 97% in only 15 years because of a new and better technology came and took over, which was the diesel electric train. So this was a disruptive technology, meaning a new technology that is better and cheaper than the old technologies. So even an enormous infrastructure, railroad system with storage, cleaning, transportation, everything of coal, even if this enormous infrastructure was completely taken out in less than 15 years. So this just shows how fast a system can change if you get a new and better technology. And Vaclav mentioned also, for example, blast furnaces. They took actually over from open heart furnaces. And that happened also very fast in many places of the world. So also big systems can change very fast. Not only telecom, we have seen this development in how the iPhone took over from the Nokia telephone and how the Nokia telephone before that took over from the fixed telephony. This happened extremely fast, but not only small things can change fast, also big things. That's why I include this. But to study this holistically, one thing is to have kind of opinions and narratives about this. But what you really need to do is to do every single energy asset and every single sector in every single country need to be assessed. And this complex slide here is showing you the framework we are using to study this. Segment by segment, sector by sector, energy carrier by energy carrier, country by country, year by year to 2100. So here you see how the primary energy is harvested on the left-hand side from the nature, solar, wind, hydropower, etc., gas, oil, coal. And then it's transported to the refinery sector, which is the second main column. Then it's moved to the middle column, which is to make heat and electricity from the molecules. And then we have distribution and storage before you finally reach the end users at the right-hand side, which is currently consuming what I showed you, after all the losses related to the transportation and usage of this energy. And if you look at solar, just to take that, solar has been by far the fastest moving energy source ever. While it took oil 40 years to have an aggregated production of 25 exajoule, it took gas only 33 years to get to the same level. But it took solar only 10 years. So solar is growing by a magnitude, order of magnitude almost, faster than previous energy sources because it has this disruptive potential, because energy is then going from being based on engineering, procurement, construction, EPC, to get into manufacturing. And suddenly the cost of solar is coming down so fast that it become most places globally basically the best new investment. It doesn't make sense to invest in any more coal-fired power plants or gas-fired power plants in a region where you have sufficient solar, which is most places, to invest in solar. So that's why we see solar booming these days. And every estimate has been adjusted upwards over the last 3 years. Last year we expected 250 gigawatt, we ended up at 400. this year, most people expect 450. We might end up at 600, let's see. So it's going extremely fast, but not only solar, also batteries that is needed. So, but basically what we are doing with this models then to try to model this bottom up for all of these nations, then we can then move into 12 different scenarios. And you see here the CO2 production from these scenarios. So like you mentioned, it's 39 gigaton of fossil fuel related emissions today. By the way, if we had the same emission intensity like we had in 1965, the current emissions would be 75 gigaton, not 39. So already we have been cutting 36 gigaton in technology improvements since 1965. This is primarily because we went from coal to gas and from oil to nuclear power with very little emissions. So these are some of the drivers. So, but each of these lines has a complete solution to the equation set that I just showed you, showing how each of the end users will get enough access to energy. But of course, then we need to discuss the realism of each of these curves in terms of the supply chain's ability to deliver and the operator's ability to find acreage, to the deployment, all of that. And I agree with Vaclav that it's very unlikely that we will manage to do this by 2050. This is the 1.5 degree scenario, which is the lowest one. I don't believe in that either. I think it's too aggressive. But I do think that 1.6 is possible with a lot of policy support. With less policy support, we are more likely to be at 1.7, 1.8, or even 1.9. So I think the interesting and likely net zero points are between 1960 and 1980. And as you see, they're all crossing the zero line because we have carbon capture and storage as a part of this. So, but how will energy transition happen? It will not happen like many people think, that because we want to stop coal, oil, and gas. And people are protesting against coal, oil, and gas and trying to stop the production of it. That has no effect. What has an effect is to introduce 24 older technologies. And here I've listed these 24 technologies. So each one of these technologies will contribute to outcompete the demand for oil, gas, and coal. The single most important one is solar, like I already mentioned, which alone will mitigate 11 gigaton of emissions. But batteries, EVs, and CCS is also very important. And as I mentioned, batteries, solar is not coming into this manufacturing window. So the Wright's law is coming to an application, meaning Mr. Wright, he studied the construction of airplanes and saw that for every doubling of the amount of airplanes, cost was going down by a certain factor. And this has not been the case for energy sources before because it's been EPC. But now they are in manufacturing. So solar can get down to below $10 per megawatt hour within the next decade. And by 2050, towards 5. And this is disrupting the entire energy system. And ultimately, energy will be boring, cheap, and accessible everywhere. But to be precise about exactly where we're landing, we are then linking these scenarios to yearly deployment needed for solar. As I mentioned, about 400 was the case last year. And here you see the curve for all of these scenarios. And then, as I said, probably the 1.5 and 1.6 are too aggressive. But we are seeing that the capacity to construct this, the 2,000 gigawatt capacity, already by solar plants that are on the drawing, that are in the construction phase now, they will actually have the capacity to deliver more than 2,000 gigawatt of annual production of solar capacity by the end of 2026. And here we need it by 2034. So by a margin, we see that this capacity is growing. You just see this here. So just check these players if they are serious. Just look at the satellite photos of the plant construction. and the annual reports or whatever for Jinko Solar, DIR Solar, Solar, etc. So these are really happening. This capacity is coming, and it will disrupt the energy system. But of course, it's a geopolitical dimension there that can be quite challenging with China soft dominating. But we see now a quite fast ramp up of module manufacturing capacity in countries like India, United States, Vietnam, Malaysia that I'm currently in, and a few other countries also. So we see at least some healthy competition, and we need to see more of that going forward. Also, we see new innovation happening in terms of where to place the solar panels. For example, on agricultural area acreage. So agrivoltaic is one of the new innovations of finding crops that goes very well together with solar panels so that you can use this. And only by using approximately 3% of the agricultural acreage in 150 countries, you will have enough solar for these countries. And we see this quite revolutionary in a lot of new concepts happening this. So this was my brief. Back to you, Vaclav also. So thank you.
Thank you, Jarand. Thank you very much for your very much detailed explanation and data. And 300 years is very impressive. By the way, I asked the same question to Vaclav. What do you think about the nuclear in your view? Is there hope for the nuclear power?
Honestly, I think that nuclear will end up as the Blu-ray player, from the music industry. The new version, which is small modular reactors, they are still under development. And I think they might come into the market in the 2030s, 2035. But then to be irrelevant because it will not be flexible enough to back up the renewable capacity, and it will be too costly. So I thought that they will be competitive from a cost point of view, since they are kind of missing the train now. You need to be competitive today and scale today to be able to compete with the combination of solar, wind, and batteries, because this is happening today and is scaling every year. And what we see for the prospects for small modular reactors are still very expensive. And we haven't not one single development decision for a real commercial plant has been taken yet. They're trying to take some in Canada and Poland and France together, etc. There's a lot of talk about it, but you never see it happen. So I thought that it would be commercially competitive within at all, actually.
Thank you. This is the kind of agreement between Vaclav and you in this nuclear's role. But let's move to Hoesung. I think you have some slides to present.
Yes, I have. Please. By the way, if the primary energy will peak, then we should not worry about planetary boundaries problem. The IPCC released the 2018 the special report on 1.5, where the concept of net zero was first announced. So we are responsible for the notion of concept net zero 2050. And if there is any confusion about that, sorry about that. And I want to give some context of that net zero 2050. My point is that whatever we are lacking is not in the science and technology part, but in the policy part. That's the focus of my intervention today. Okay, just to give you some facts, the IPCC 1.5 pathway is basically is global warming continue, and 10-year average of moving average of 1.5 degree will reach in early part of 2030s. And then temperature will exceed 1.5 degrees C by about at the most optimistic scenario is about 0.1 degree, exceed that, and then decline toward 1.5 by the end of 2100. So stabilizing the global warming, 1.5 means stabilizing by the end of the century. But to do that, net zero will have to occur 2050. And this trajectory requires, first of all, the 220 gigaton of CO2 of carbon dioxide removal. And the IPCC has assessed the cost ranges of cost for these options, and the numbers are there. And the research and the technology, the R&D and also technological development should be in the pipeline. Sorry about that. Now, this is one of the features, but not much known, but I have to tell this. IPCC 1.5 degrees C, that trajectory depends on demand-side performance, critically depend on demand-side performance. First, the final energy consumption in our report, 23 synthesis, and also the 3 our reports, indicates will not grow for the next 30 years. It stays constant at around 410 exajoule. Stays constant final energy consumption. And this is due to the assumption is the energy efficiency will double in this period. And also, assessment indicate that the electricity consumption projected to double between 2020 and 2050 for the next 30 years. It sounds very high. However, this projection was made before the AI boom and also data center electricity requirement. And also interestingly, in the last 30 years, the electricity consumption more than doubled. So obviously, this assessment of power demand relied very much on the very rapid improvement in the efficiency in the use of electricity. But again, that was made before this AI. And if you look at the IEA's electricity, the projection studies, several months ago, they released just one standalone document about electricity. That document, for the first time, mentioned the AI-related electricity requirement, and just very briefly says that previously the power demand related to the digital matters occupied about 1% of industrial power consumption, but their assessment of this impact of AI on the electricity means that it will grow to 4% of industrial power consumption. However, they did not mention how much electricity consumption will change due to the AI. I believe the next round of the World Energy Outlook will reflect these changes. And I'm sure the scientists working, serving the IPCC community will also have to look at this, the electricity demand projection, from this new informations. Now, the demand side solutions, energy efficiency improvement and behavioral change, we assess that it could cut the final energy demand by about half by 2030 relative to the baseline. Again, a good assumption. And then the demand side performance is subject to the socioeconomic conditions assumed for the future. And now socioeconomic conditions. This is a rather crowded diagram, and I ask you to pay attention to the two sections in the middle curves. On the left panel, it is an emissions diagram. On the middle panel, the diagram is the temperatures. And as the something like the bank documents or insurance documents, if you want to see the important messages, you look into the small letter. Again, here, if you look at the lines going down in both two panels, you can see I hope you can see that it's something like the SSP1, something. And only the SSP1 is related to the downward sloping curve in the emissions and downward sloping curve in the temperature pointing to the 1.5 degrees at the end of the century. So what's SSP1 and what's the SSP something else, SSP3 pointing to the very rapid high increase in the temperature. So this is the SSP1 related to the sustainability scenarios and also related to the 1.5. And it is a very ideal world, shift gradually to the sustainable path, very inclusive development and respect the environmental boundaries, respect again the planetary boundaries, and then inequality is reduced, and then we will have a much lower material growth, in other words, sustainable consumption, and lower resource and lower energy intensity. It's an ideal world, great. Now, what's the other? SSP3, this is a regional rivalry. It says that a resurgent nationalism, concerns about competitiveness and regional and security, regional conflicts, and the national, regional security issues looms large, more than the environmental issues, and energy and food security goals within their own regions. So not in my backyard, that's not the story, but only in my own yards. So it is a disruption in the global supply chains, inequality persist or worsen. Do you think this scenario was written after the Ukraine war? No. This scenario was written 80 years ago. So something, it depicts, scenario developments depicts the breakdown of the continuing general globalization trends. So we are more closely approaching this SSP3. Now, what that means. So global net zero, I want to emphasize that everyone has a role to play, but that does not mean that we should carry all the same loads together. Some segment, someone should take the lead role. Absolute lead role. That's the government. The government should set the rules for the market and work toward extra market collaboration across the country. Now, currently, 70% of global emissions are from non-OECD. And Vaclav mentioned the various materials productions, and 70 to 80% of raw steel, cement, chemicals produced in non-OECD countries. And the rich countries, the consumption-based CO2 emissions, Vaclav mentioned the various things we have. It has all carbon content. That consumption-based CO2 emissions in the rich countries exceed their production-based CO2 emissions. All the emitting power plants are outside, mostly outside of the rich countries region, although there are some exceptions. Now, under these circumstances, global net zero depends on non-OECD countries achieving carbon-free economic development. The question is, will there be technology and finance for them? They're already far stretched on these 2 points. Now, the global net zero requires a government policy to have market internalized carbon externality and prevent net zero policy from impairing equity. This is the basic government's role. And without that, what happened? Well, unfortunately, this laggard government actions led to proliferation of private sector initiatives. Good intentions, adorable, something like ESG's disclosures, but the question is, do such initiatives reduce global carbon emissions? That's the questions we have to answer. Now, when we look at the cost versus benefit, the global sense, no doubt there's a net benefit at the global sense, but that global net benefit be translated to the net benefit at the individual level, such that the consumers will choose the low carbon content products, services, and investors will invest in the low carbon projects and opportunities. If you look at for instance, the World Coal Associations, they are very bullish about their market. And if you look at the International Energy Forum, is another industry group specifically looking into the oil and gas trajectories. They are very bullish on the investment aspects of the oil and gas sectors. So this is the reality, and we have to look into seriously. And again, I emphasize that if governments take the backseat and encourage others to work together with government, that's the road to failure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hoesung. It's an issue of policy and government policy. I cannot agree more. Okay, let's move to Sakano-san. When you observe these discussions of Vaclav and Jarand and Hoesung, what is your reaction as a young representative of this session?
Oh, God. Thank you very much. So first things pops up in my head, hearing all this discussion, and especially like discussing what will be look like in 2050. I reminded of one book, which was written back in 90s on science fiction. Actually, this is written by Japanese, and I think it's only published in Japanese, sadly. But the title is Year 2050 will be Edo era. So Edo era is the Japanese era, well, from 1600 to 1800-ish. And then that was a time when the whole country was closed. Yeah. So basically, everything was internalized almost. So normally, you know, when Japanese people refer to the fully circular society or something like that, then we actually refer to Edo era. And then, well, the point is, during the book, since it's a fiction, it suddenly happens during 2050 that, you know, energy supply stops. And then with that, of course, like other supplies coming to stop. So basically, people started leaving Tokyo, and then they started live in like rural area where we can actually produce food, we can actually produce things by ourselves. Then the generation that time questions, looking at the pile of the cars dumped in the dump site, and then, you know, why, you know, past people actually dump everything which is valuable. So that's basically all about the story. But basically, throughout the story, people actually feel happier in that sense. So my question is, what is the well-being? And then what is the happiness for humankind? And then probably reading through that book, some people think it's a dystopia, but some, including maybe myself, actually feels it's maybe a better life of the choice. But like the point is, maybe we are no longer connected that fully internationally via internet or anything anymore, and then that of course limits the information, and that goes back to different scenes or different view of the society or the world. But the question is, well, if you don't like that, then of course something needs to be happen. Otherwise, we might be, stepping towards such society in the future. So then, like the entire question is basically, well, we understand maybe it's not possible by 2050, and it could be 2060. But like from my point of view, it doesn't matter 2050 or 60. But like, can anything happen to drastic curve to happen to decrease 7%, which was just discussed beforehand. And then half of my still young, I'd say, and then naive part of me, still hope that maybe global governance or whatever collaborative agreement happens to we set the limits, we set the regulation, we set the clear targets that everyone follows. But half of me, of course, think that well, it's not happening, And then how can we actually do that? Then just to share my background, I'm currently working with communities and the municipal government in the local level, and then trying to build, more locally circulate resources and like zero waste society. Well, not zero waste, but like lessen, the waste production, and then try to make sure that, resources stays within the local community, and then of course that's followed by the economic values stays in the community. Then we actually see lots of such movement coming out from the grassroots and local communities all over the world. And then we actually see the shift when we actually close the loop in the local community, and that's slightly more feasible than we just talk in the global scale. But the pace of such transition in the local community level is slow. So that's our challenges, of course. So the point is, how can we still, pushing for such, grounded transformation continuously happening? How can we actually, push that to happen slightly faster, of course, but at the same time, probably we also need to come back to the discussion of how can we actually set the limits from the top down somehow, and then maybe I need to second the opinion of maybe like we just put the tax or something like that for the higher emitter or something like that. But anyway, so that's where I stand at this point, and I'd love to ask back for further discussion.
Thank you, Sakano-san. Do you want to stay in the society like Edo period in 2050 yourself?
Well, I might. And then when I imagine, I actually feel happier because I don't get, well, maybe I don't get access to more information, but still, like, I can have a grasp of what's happening. I can actually be responsible of the production, consumption, and then all the circulation in your own, eyes and in your own power. Mm-hmm. So that's more, in a way, happier life. I don't know if anyone agrees, but yes.
Yeah, thank you, because it's you, the young people, who decide the future. It's not us. I mean, we are dying anyway soon, so you are left behind and you have to decide yourself. Oh, Ismail, I think you will live longer than me, but you are the wise man of the steering committee. What do you think?
Well, you're very kind. I think that, frankly, the way things are going right now, there is no political will that is sufficient to enforce the transformations that are required. We're witnessing in many countries, even the democratic West countries, the right-wing movements who are in America, for example, blatantly denying still climate change is a reality, and who knows, he may still be elected. But that is very serious. I think the speed with which this can be done will be difficult. However, I have three very specific proposals that I would like to put forward. The first of these is that instead of, I mean, we have mentioned several times that we will probably need to have direct reduction of carbon that is already in the air. Well, the way I think to do it is not to build factories in Switzerland that are going to cost $100 a ton or whatever. We have the food and agricultural system, food and agriculture sector, which is now a major contributor to greenhouse gases, both CO2 and methane, particularly, less nitrous oxide. But fundamentally, it is a terribly mismanaged system. It has about 30% of total wastage in it, in the sense that the food that is produced doesn't reach the consumers. In the poorest countries, it is on the production side, because the poor farmers don't have proper storage, proper transport, and therefore post-harvest losses sometimes run 30-35% in many parts of Africa. In the rich countries, it's on the consumption side, where the food is produced and then a lot of it is thrown away, and the thrown away food also contributes to methane emissions. And despite all of that, we are still having about 1 in 10 of the human population still going hungry. And therefore, I mean, there's a lot to be done in that sector. Now, that sector currently produces about 25% of global emissions. But I believe that not only it can be reduced, it can be flipped over and become the major, or one of the major means of carbon capture and sequestration. It is nature's own system. Plants are nature's own system for carbon capture and sequestration. And now we have new tools. Genetic manipulation inside the plants can bring traits that the plants, that as they grow, can consume twice as much carbon dioxide as their previous relatives. Just as we increase yield, we increase nutritional content, we increase other salt tolerance, drought tolerance, shorter growing season. We can do all of that now much more quickly than we ever could through conventional breeding systems that take a very long time. Secondly, we have to note we're also using 70% of the global water. 2/3 of global water withdrawals are going into agriculture right now. And not to mention what was said earlier about the destruction of the forests and the Amazon and all of that. So whether you're dealing with landscapes and how you deal with the transformation, about 43% of the land mass of the earth has been transformed for agriculture. So how you can transform that back again, you can increase the plants. So with these tools, we can have a major transformation for the benefit of the poor and the benefit of the hungry, and at the same time, the benefit of the environment and humanity, and become a major tool to reduce carbon emissions rather than emit itself. Secondly, people will say, well, how long would that take? Well, I have a very positive and easy answer. Back in the 1950s and 60s, India, that could not feed 450 million, so that even great environments like Paul Ehrlich were saying, you know, famine in 1975 is going to reach India. Well, there was the Green Revolution. And the Green Revolution relies on dwarf wheats that were developed in Simit and in Erie varieties of rice, etc. But the Green Revolution, yes, used more fertilizer and more irrigation water, but it immediately doubled the production level. And in fact, if you look at 50 years, from say 1960 to, or roughly 60 years from 1960s to 2020, India, that could not feed 450 million people, has now 1,400 million people, and is a major exporter of all these agricultural products. It has quintupled its crop production. It has increased its horticulture production. It's number 2 in the world. It's number 1 in the world on milk production. It's number 2 in the world. Now, here's my key argument. If we could do this 60 years ago, with the technology of 60 years ago, with the communications of 60 years ago, with the infrastructure of 60 years ago, I say there is no reason why we couldn't do it on a global scale today with our technologies. I mean, they didn't even know about genes at the time when this was being done. The discovery of the double helix came in 1953. So we have potential there. And that should supplement action at the local size using, for example, off-grid solar and other things to deal with other problems in some remote communities. But last proposal would be that we should look at regional projects in many of the small countries, and regional energy projects in the small countries, and connect these cities together, because they are too weak to do it otherwise.
Okay, thank you very much, Ismail. I will give the floor back to Vaclav. When you hear all these arguments from Jarand, from Sakano-san, Hoesung, and Ismail, what do you now think? You haven't changed at all your view about the future?
Absolutely not. And because it's a simple, all I cited is not what I think or what I believe. I cited the facts. And the fact is that just before I left on Sunday, I got the news of the latest McKinsey report. So if you think I'm totally out of it, McKinsey is the biggest consultancy in the world. They just issued a new report about energy transition, and they actually ventured the forecast. I don't say how many percent will be fossil, but McKinsey says anywhere between 40 to, right now, 80% of primary energy globally is fossil fuels. McKinsey says that by 2050, 40 to 60% will be fossil fuels. And I basically have no disagreement with it. I wouldn't point out if it's 45 or whatever, but basically, so again, I must repeat, it's a simple fact. Jarand mentioned that, that open house furnaces were rapidly replaced by basic oxygen furnaces. That's a fact, but that's for making steel. For making iron, it's still the blast furnace which is making iron, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So I go with myself, with my facts, and I go with McKinsey. 40 to 60% by 2050 will be fossil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vaclav. Time is almost up, but before ending, I will ask all the audience who win this discussion, Vaclav or the others, or tie. So I will give you three choices. One, Vaclav, Smil. Two, everybody else. And the third is a tie. Are you ready to vote? Okay, those who think Vaclav Smil win, raise your hand. Okay, about 20. Those who believe the other participants win. Okay, less than 10. So that means all others think it's tie. Those who think it's tie, please raise your hands. Okay. Yeah, about 20. Thank you very much, because I think important thing is who is right in the end. We don't know. But important element is how public will understand this issue and agree to this way or that way. Otherwise, the policymakers cannot make a right decision. So perception of the public is very, very important to decide our future. So think carefully. We know, I don't know who is right, but we have to think very seriously about this issue to respond to the Johan Rockström's planetary boundary issues, and we have to be very serious. Otherwise, we are in deep trouble of the risks of the high cost and even the life of many humans, as Ismail is saying. And I thank you very much for all the panelists. Jarand, thank you very much for joining. I wish you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me.